Our next speaker that we have is Norm Senjem, who is representing the Lake Pepin Legacy Alliance and is no stranger to a microphone. Good luck, Norm.
Does this go up?
It does.
Right.
Look at you already handling the technology.
Okay, and how do I toggle here? Down or up or? Oh, down. Okay, well, good to be here today. Norman Senjem. I'm a member of the Lake Pepin Legacy Alliance. I kind of re-engaged in this business about a year ago as a volunteer. My profession before that was with a pollution control agency, and one of my major projects had to do with sediment and phosphorus pollution coming from the Minnesota River affecting the Lake Pepin and the Mississippi. So this is kind of, I've been a little out of circulation for the past 12 years, so I won't be aware of all the ins and outs, but I have some perspective, and they asked me to take a look at the last 20 years or so of data to see how we're doing with respect to the goals that were set in the total maximum daily load studies that I worked on. So that's kind of where I started on this. And I will tend to focus on part of a piece of the puzzle. Start out very broadly, but focus in on what I see as some opportunities to focus. So you're familiar with these kind of pictures from last June when we had those back-to-back 6-inch rainfalls that caused the Rapidan Dam to partially collapse and streets to get flooded, and there was quite a bit of alarm at the time about what to do about that. And to me, it's just, it kind of reminded us of how the changing climate is affecting things. So we're having, just from the state DNR website, the 6-inch rainfalls that precipitated this event are 4 times more likely today than they were before 1990. And as Holly indicated, the annual rainfall has increased by 3.5 inches, 10%. So all of that is putting a lot of pressure on the existing stream system. We're seeing roughly a doubling of flow as you measure it at Jordan. And these slides, I kind of, I scavenged them from my own pen drive when I was back working. They're a little bit shorted, but I've seen other data. I think we still have a doubling of flow in the Minnesota River. That's a lot of additional pressure on the stream, and widening of 50% near Jordan due to that pressure. And what the Lake Pepin people are mostly concerned about, I would say, is all the sediment that's coming from the Minnesota River. It's over 75% of the sediment filling in that lake is coming from here. And so you see, especially 2016 to 2020, there was an unprecedented period of high sediment loading, 1 million metric tons, year after year after year after year, when the TMDL was calling for a 60% reduction. And then this is what nature gives us. So yeah, we do have to catch up with the changing climate as we look at policies. I think it's important to realize, and this is a Kerry Jennings slide here, a geologist who has been around this issue a lot. This landscape in the Minnesota River is primed to erode. We had 12,000 years ago or so, the catastrophic drainage after the glacier started to melt from the glacial Lake Agassiz, forming over hundreds of years this Minnesota River Valley, which they called the Glacial River Warren after a geologist at the time. And that created this huge channel, 250 feet deep or so, couple, 3, 4, 5 miles wide in some places. And after it all kind of drained away, after that event was over, we have this little, as you see, this kind of little slit called the Minnesota River there. And so from then on, the river, just the force of gravity has caused erosion coming down the tributaries year after year after year. And if you add twice as much water to the system, you just get twice as much erosion, et cetera. I don't know if it's a linear relationship, but you get the point, and you get a landscape like this downstream of, or just south of Mankato, showing you all the kind of the network of ravines where a lot of erosion is coming from. And as Holly said, a lot of the concern is with the near channel sources, the bluffs, as you see in a smaller tributary there, the stream bank erosion falling in, and then the ravines, which start small at the edge of a field and then grow to sometimes vast proportions and carry a lot of sediment with them. And I'm going to focus on ravines just as a way of focusing on something that's kind of hidden away at the edge of fields and under the trees, under the, that maybe isn't getting enough attention. And you get some of the causes are, tile drainage outlets that are not protected. They can become the sources of ravines. You get just erosion runoff from the edge of a field. It starts small and it gets bigger, as you see on the right-hand side there. And the university, John Niebuhr, estimated kind of the locations of concentrations of some of these ravines, and you see them kind of hugging the main stem quite a long way up. And then in the Blue Earth River Basin, also along the Coteau and the western edge of the basin as well. So it's a widespread problem. And the approach that I'm suggesting today kind of was triggered by reading a report of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, something I didn't know existed until recently, on the 7 Mile Creek watershed, about 23,000 acres between St. Peter and Mankato. That's not this watershed. I took this one for its aerial perspective to be able to label it like this. But they did an intensive gridded watershed model and just tested some of the approaches and how effective they would be. And to get kind of doing an anatomy of the ravine, you have the ravine head. That's kind of what's back cutting all the time, getting bigger as storm events erode at the edge. And then you have the ravine catchment, and I just use that as a catchy phrase, excuse the pun. But we say big watershed, small watershed, minor watershed, basin. And there you see the Wascub watershed, what is it, water and sediment control basin. That is the traditional solution. That's designed for a storm event of once in 10 years. And today that doesn't quite cut the mustard. So what more could be done? The Army Corps study estimated the best solution for that watershed, the most effective one, would be cover crops in combination with that Wascub. And so the cover crop has to be, so the legislative agenda would include activities, support for cover crops and wetlands in that catchment. And if you think about it, the wetland would be offering storage that keeps water from getting to the stream, but also prevents that immediate sediment. So you kind of get a 2-for-1. The ravine head make the Wascub kind of priority area in the ravine head. Cropland interface, people at the, this is way back in the 2000s, early 2000s, the Kevin Keener and his group at the Watershed, they came up with a buffer strip that they actually got converted into an FSA number. So it's a practice that can be done to control erosion there. And the concluding slide, I think I'm just in time, is, I think this, when you go, if you're going to go after something like a specific problem, ravines, say, just to focus attention on a major problem that may have been a little bit hidden, you want to start with a publicity and education campaign so people come to understand why this is an important issue. You need the landowner incentives, which can be juiced a little bit. There's some out there already, quite a bit. Technical assistance. We have the the Soil and Water Conservation District regional joint powers boards that can be staffed to provide people across watershed boundaries and county boundaries. And that all ends up to the three-legged stool. And Steve, as an alumnus of the Board of Water and Soil Resources, I was almost reminded by your colleagues that that's what an effective program needs, the three-legged stool. So with that, I'll pause and take any questions.
We could have skipped all those years of university if they'd just shown us a picture of a stool way back when. All right, board members, any questions or things that you'd like clarified before we release Norman?
Yeah, could you speak more to how you think, just holistically in this basin, how we would sort of approach this big problem of identifying ravines and other opportunities for restoration and prioritizing them? Do you have any thoughts there that you could expound on?
Well, you can look at some watersheds that have done a lot of emphasis on this, and I checked with the Nicollet County people, and they've done a lot of wetland or WASCOB implementation in the 7 Mile Creek. So that could be looked upon as, how did you get water? How did you get landowners interested in this? What kind of incentives and education did it take? But I think, I guess, and in Goodhue County, right on the Minnesota, right on Lake Pepin, they've done a lot of work similarly and have plans to go further. So talk to people who have already done a lot of work on it, and they can give you some on-the-ground experience. Otherwise, I think just education, incentives, and keep talking about it and talking it up and providing some priority type incentives that if you locate a BMP here, you'll be eligible for this additional bit of incentive.
So I find the story of, I think all of us have found the story of Lake Pepin to be a compelling canary in the coal mine of the overall issues, right? That we can look at the sedimentation, and folks have done the DNA analysis of the sediment to tell you exactly where it's coming from and what percentage of it's coming from the Minnesota River. And seems to me that the core of the story that I hear from Lake Pepin is we get the impact, and you folks upstream need to start addressing the issues.
Right.
And that's been a lot of what we've experienced as the final mile watershed district. But we are still struggling with what's the narrative, what's the story, what's the compelling way to engage folks outside of the watershed in the importance of this when it's such an immediate issue for us in the area. So I'm curious if you could speak a little to both A, the experience, and B, the proposed strategy for the Lake Pepin Alliance of engaging folks outside of the immediate basin in being part of the solution for the basin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, understand I'm a kind of a newbie, kind of an oldie but a newbie, but so I'm not into the deep strategy of the organization, but I think there's the Army Corps of Engineers has spent something like almost $40 to $50 million on dredging in the upper Lake Pepin to restore some of its ecological quality. And that's because a lot of the sediment that's been deposited there over the years. Bay City was pretty much, you couldn't take a canoe from Bay City out to the main stem almost. But I think we're in the process of looking at what do you call them, town hall meetings based on some of the research I pulled together. And we're looking at evaluating what's the speed and at which, and the pathway at which the Lake Pepin is filling in. For years we've heard from the St. Croix research station that it's filling in at 10 times the natural rate, and in 300 years will be largely filled in. and there'll be a ribbon of water with wetlands around it, kind of like the lower Minnesota. And yeah, I lose my train of thought. I may have. Yeah, we're have a conversation with the other research station at the St. Anthony Falls Hydraulics Laboratory to look at another kind of sedimentation, which is the sand that's kind of moving in from the bottom up. And so if we can look at that, we'll have a better understanding of how this lake is going to change its morphology over time. But I don't know, I worked on this for decades in the public sphere, and I don't know if there's any magic answer. I think things are going better than I was surprised. Taking a look 12 years later, there have been some improvements in farming practices and stuff, and it hasn't been enough to cope with this changing climate, though. And so to get there, to have a, farmland is worth 10,000 an acre or so, and so the cost of restoring that to that cropland to water storage is quite high, whether it's a public storage paid for or private. And so that's why I brought up ravines as kind of a more kind of, it doesn't take as much land out of production. I don't know if it does exactly the same amount of water storage, probably not, but it's at least an alternative that you can start working on. So I don't know if that answers.
I was just going to add that the Lower Min has, over the last 3 years, done a pretty comprehensive study and research on the ravines in the Lower Min, and highlighting which ones are contributing most to the sedimentation from within our scope, and pivoting towards what are the unique solutions that each of those ravines need, because they're not all the same, as Holly mentioned. And I think, unfortunately, that's been one of the areas that we've had to decrease funding for, as our funding limits, kind of hit some caps, and figuring out how that can be a potential basin-wide strategy. I'm intrigued to think about that and work with you guys on that more. Thank you.
I think, another advantage of the ravine approach is you can approach it as part of what the NRCS used to call a working lands approach. Instead of taking land out of production, you're just using it differently. And these WASP clubs, they take very little land out of production. And also you're dealing with the landowner from the standpoint of a problem that's obvious. It's not, well, down in Lake Pepin, you got this problem, down in the lower Minnesota, you got this problem. It's no, right on the edge of your field, it's eating away at your field. Wouldn't you like to do something about that? Wouldn't you like to square off that border and prevent more erosion? So.
All right, thank you, Norman. Very much appreciate it. That one, come on up. And I'll just point out one connecting point between Holly's talk and what Norm's saying. When Holly had mentioned, money, which pays for staff, and Norm was talking about putting these water and sediment control basins in. It's not your first visit to a farmer that he says, oh, sure, I'll sign up, let's do it now. It's 3 or 4 or 5 visits. And so keeping that staff there is a connecting point between those first two talks. So, Mr.